We'll take just another minute and then we will begin. I think you can hear me all. Is this fine? Okay, so in another minute, we'll begin. Our speakers are here, so we're pretty well set.
Don't know what they might say. Learned that a long time ago. You can be like this. All right, we're fine. All right, just move it closer. That's not.
Good afternoon to everyone, and welcome to this hybrid side event. My name is Barbara Bozak, and I represent the congregations of St. Joseph at the United Nations here in New York, and I will be the moderator for this afternoon's event. It's wonderful to see many of you here in the room and a number of people also online. So we're happy that this moves forward both in a hybrid manner. We ask those of you who are online to please keep your microphones muted to avoid any background noise or disturbance to the event. And also, if you have any questions, these are the people online, please put them into the chat box. At the end, we hope to have time to entertain some questions. We will take them here in the room orally, but those of you online will ask you to put them into the chat box, which you can do at any time during this event. Well, I welcome all of you to this side event, Building a Collective Future, Grassroots Voices on Emerging Priorities for the Second World Social Summit. This event is co-sponsored by the Mission of Portugal and UN Department of Social Affairs, Division for Inclusive Social Development, as well as the NGO Committee for Social Development. As we are hearing this week, there is great hope for the Second World Summit, Social Summit, which will be held in November. It's a significant global event aimed at fostering inclusive social development and addressing the key challenges to achieving well-being for all, many of which have been presented these past days during the Commission meeting. As we prepare for the summit, it is more important than ever that those who are on the margins of society and are experiencing the growing inequalities have a voice in how to meet the issues that they face. Since we of the Grassroots Subcommittee believe that people-centered development, the people-centered development of the 1995 Copenhagen Declaration must include the voice and wisdom of those who suffer from exclusion, we will once again today bring some voices from the grassroots to this UN Commission meeting in the hope that their voices will reach some of the leaders who are shaping the Second World Social Summit. The format this afternoon is very simple. We will begin with two speakers, one from the Mission of Portugal, one from DESA. I will introduce them at the appropriate time. and they will address the topic of what is needed for a more inclusive and equitable society from their own perspectives. There will then be an explanation of our project, followed by 6 individuals speaking of the situation where they are. 5 coming to us in recorded videos, 1 joining us online. Finally, we will have 1 presenter pull the threads together before taking some time for questions or comments. We expect we will have enough time to accomplish all of this afternoon. Our first speaker is Mr. Jorge Aranda, Deputy Permanent Representative of the Permanent Mission of Portugal to the United Nations in New York. Mr. Aranda has been a Portuguese diplomat since 1998 and has been posted to Copenhagen, Berlin, Warsaw, Helsinki, and NATO in Brussels. He has experience as diplomatic advisor to the Prime Minister, to the Secretary of State for European Affairs, and to the Secretary of State for National Defense. He has a very broad background, which will inform his words, I'm sure. Mr. Aranda will address how governments and civil society can work together to build inclusive, sustainable, and resilient societies that put grassroots people and their well-being at the center. Mr. Aranda, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. And for us, Mission of Portugal, it's a true pleasure. May I steal your microphone?
Please, absolutely.
I have here another one. And for me personally, it's also a pleasure to be here again at Baha'i. We are always welcomed, and I must commend your work, but also the work of Baha'i in bringing civil society together with the so-called decision makers. And this topic, louder, yes, or maybe closer to the mic.
Yes.
And this one is a topic that we are particularly fond of, because this is one of those topics where you see what difference you can make as a policy maker, as a decision maker, but also one that includes in this process of decision making the voices of civil society. And then it's also a topic, social development, that it's very close to our hearts. You mentioned my career and to deepen. When I was posted there, it was after the first World Social Summit, but I was in Portugal in 2021 during our last Portuguese presidency of the European Union. And I would like here to share with you the fact that during this time, we organized in the second city of Portugal, the city of Porto, the European Social Summit. And it was kind of like an original initiative, but as it's so sometimes happens, you know, just doing the obvious is sometimes maybe too obvious to do. And the fact that we organized in Porto this gathering of government, civil society, academia, NGOs proved to be a success. And from that summit also came out some elements that we are willing now to share here with you. So it happened in a time, and we all remember COVID-19, right? But it was a time where COVID was not the only crisis. We already were facing crises such as the climate emergency, the economic instability, a lot of geopolitical tensions around the world. So nothing new, actually, right? And because of most of these crises still persist today, we believe that these challenges continue to account for very well-known inequalities. Our societies are vulnerable, and this makes a lot of pressure on our social systems, but on the citizens individually. So at the heart of our concerns is this very well-known sentence, leaving no one behind, because we are talking about the social summit here. and society at large, but the society is made of individuals, just like us here. So individual citizens should also be at the heart of this people-centered approach that our moderator today was referring to. Now, this also means that we have to do our best to protect the most vulnerable in this society with a view to ensuring that there are equal opportunities for all. So, a couple of thoughts. One of them is governments must lead by example. Obviously, because states have an essential role. We see it here at the United Nations around the table. It's the states that call the shots, so to speak, that take the decisions, that can, by their actions, promote the inclusion that we all need. And they are the ones that nationally have to invest in all things needed, from social protection systems, healthcare, housing, education, all the pillars that specifically in times of crisis are most needed. And also, the governments are responsible for the economic situation of the country. So, dealing with economic recovery, with economic stability of a country, but also with all these transitions that we are now trying to accomplish. The digital transition, the environmental transition, all these transitions that will lead us, so we hope, to a better and a more inclusive society. Then secondly, civil society has a role to play. I'm looking around here and I see not just member states, the international organizations, NGOs, individual citizens. I see here men and women, younger and older, working and still not working. So kind of like reflection of society at large, right? So when we think that of civil society in its role that it has to play, it's not just about listening to you, because there's a lot, there's often this discourse about listening. And obviously we are here to listen to you, but we are aware that you do things. So we're not just listening your opinion. We want also to listen to what you're already doing on the ground, and I'm looking forward to these witnesses that we are about to see. So it's not just about listening and then reflecting in our decisions what we listen here. It's already collaborating together with you in what you're already doing. Thirdly, social partners. Now, we know this includes employers, this includes trade unions, and we need to engage all of them in this inclusive and meaningful dialogue so that we have economic and social conditions which benefit all, and not just obviously the privileged few. So this social dialogue, as we also know from our societies, is the third thing that I would like to highlight here. But at the same time, we also have to recognize the intersectionality. A lot also was already said on this topic, and it's not just about collecting points on vulnerability situations, right? Because intersectionality is a form of understanding different forms of inequality or discrimination based on age, on gender, on disability, on countries of origin. So it's not about that, it's about understanding how those vulnerabilities may interact. Lastly, and to conclude, I don't know if this was a sign already that I was speaking too long or not. It's the question, it's the question of solidarity. We are working together. As we are sitting here around this table, we also have to work in this solidarity that we preach a lot. And what does it mean? It means that we have to find a way in which whatever we think, so our opinions, but whatever we do, so our actions can be articulated, and that our thoughts and our actions can be mutually beneficial. So governments and civil society. And I will stop here. Maybe there's time for discussion later on. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Aranda. You brought up very beautifully the importance of working together. That's the solidarity that all of the groups, government, civil society, trade unions, employers, and so forth must work together to move forward toward social development, which will leave no one behind and bring us all together. So I think those are certainly the elements that we need to continue to consider as we're moving forward. So thank you. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Ms. Marta Roig, Senior Social Affairs Officer at the UN Department of Social and Economic Affairs, the Division for Inclusive Social Development. Ms. Roig has over 25 years of experience conducting policy research and analysis related to inequality, social exclusion, international migration, and their linkages to development. She currently leads the preparation of UN DESA's World Social Report and is supporting consultations and coordinating technical input for the UN World Social Summit in 2025. We've asked her to speak on what kind of social policies are necessary to address inequalities and social exclusion, issues that continue to be highlighted by grassroots voices. So, Roy, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Thanks so much to the SPOINA and to the NGO subcommittee for their invitation. Thank you also to the Baha'i community, to all of you for opening spaces for deliberation and thinking, because frankly, I have to say, from the perspective of the UN Secretariat, we have very little opportunities to listen and learn from you. So the more we can open spaces to do that, the better, within the UN or outside. So I'll keep my presentation very short because I want to learn and listen. Just at the outset, I have to say that I come to this from a very academic perspective. So bear with me if the presentation is too technical. I can clarify some things, but in any case. So yes, the question that was posed is what social policies are necessary to address inequalities and exclusion. And I like to, not yet, please, yeah. And I like to take a step back and ask what kind of action is necessary to address inequalities. And on that, I would say that social policies are necessary, indeed. They are a part of the picture, but they are only part of the picture. If we look at, in terms of policy, what's needed to address inequality and exclusion is a whole of government approach. Social policies are not sufficient. There has to be, addressing inequality has to be a priority, it has to permeate, and it has to, all policies have to be coherent, right? You cannot have social policies that aim at doing one thing and then have, for example, macroeconomic policies that deprive ministers of social affairs from doing what they want to do. That's just an example. So what we try to promote now from DESA is the need for an equity lens to policymaking, focusing all kinds of policies, but based on an equity lens. Beyond policy, addressing inequality and exclusion requires much more, right? It needs also changes in institutions, in norms, and in values. That last square green on the right should be larger than all and have the whole government approach inside, but I'm not good at designing, so you just imagine it that way. It is the responsibility of all of us to affect institutions, norms, and values. Governments alone cannot and will not do it. It's up to civil society, it's up to corporations, schools, trade unions, employers, to move towards norms, values, and institutions that will promote equity and then will promote social inclusion. So social policies are but one ingredient. That's next thing is this: is it about what policies, or is it about how we do policy? And on that, the questions that I have are: how are policies prioritized? Who decides where policies are implemented and what not? What gives policies legitimacy? Are policies decided on a top-down way, or are communities involved in deciding what kinds of policies are put in place? And if it's communities, which communities? That's also important. Who decides within communities? Are there spaces for deliberation and participation or not? Is there trust? Trust is perhaps the most fundamental ingredient when it comes to how and whether we implement certain kinds of policies or not. So legitimacy is one thing. The other one is how are policies implemented? Often the focus of discussions here, even at the UN, is very much on technical aspects of how policies are implementing, but there's much more than the technical aspects, right? There's also the relational aspects, the buy-in from the communities that will be affected by the policies, again, the trust has to come into the picture. There's the issue of short-termism too. Many times policies are too focused on obtaining immediate results. And thus, for example, building a school is an end on itself, but there is no attention on improving access to education or improving learning outcomes. That's just to give an example among many, right? And then there's also the issue of the fact that problems are complex, especially, I would think, social problems. And so sometimes we measure progress and we are too focused on measuring progress and we want to see progress as linear, but progress is non-linear and many times it's very slow. Especially if you remember the green square, institutional change is very slow and there are backs and forths. And so we focusing too much on measuring progress can be detrimental, although it may be necessary. And on the how still, social policies, depending on how they implement it, can be counter-effective, right? They can marginalize some groups more than promote their inclusion. They can create backlash. They can undermine solidarity. So again, it very much depends on how policies are implemented, in one word. So to the question on what social policies are necessary now, the way in which we approach social policies from the point of view of the report that I prepared is, if we can go to the next slide. We divide policies on the ones that expand people's access to opportunities. Having equal opportunity from birth is obviously fundamental to promoting inclusion. These are policies such as access to education, access to health, access to housing. Again, very much depends on how these policies on education and health are implemented. Educational systems can help equalize, but they can also increase inequalities instead of addressing them. Employment and decent work. Of course, one can have access to education and health, but if there is no access to decent work, investments in health and education lead nowhere, and so on. Second set of policies about promoting redistribution and income security. Universal social protection systems come in the picture here. And so does progressive taxation, right? Without funding for universal protection systems, the adequacy of the transfers that people receive are very small, insufficient, etc. In terms of progressive taxation, there's progressive income policies, income taxes, wealth taxes, and so on. Then the next thing is tackling prejudice, discrimination. Of course, this goes very much beyond social policies, and we go back again to the issue of changes in values and institutions and norms and etc. And the last part, which we never focus too much on, is the community building processes. The fact that it's not only about helping individuals succeed, but helping communities together to succeed. And for that, we need to work on promoting institutions that promote equity, that promote recognitions, or groups or people that have not been recognized. And that starts with very simple, having civil registration systems that account for everybody. Institutions for cooperation and institutions for solidarity. I have spoken too much. I'm going to stop here and then we can continue the discussion later. And I have more slides if anyone is interested. Thank you very much.
They said, can we see the slides later?
Later.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Roy. That is very interesting. And, it certainly is true that we need good policies, but as you have stated beautifully, it's the implementation and how they're implemented that also makes a difference, and the importance of building community and building trust so that people are willing to move forward with the implementation and finding ways of doing this in a very fair, equitable manner. And the fact that progress is complex, and just because we have good policies and we put some of them into effect doesn't necessarily mean there are not some negative side effects to that, which we also need to be aware of. All of life is complex, but certainly any governance and policy making is very complex. Thank you very much. This has been a very excellent beginning. Before we move on to our videos and the voices from the grassroots. But before we hear the voices from the grassroots, Dr. Lynn Healy will give us some background on the project. She is the chair of the Grassroots Subcommittee and has guided this together with all the members in a very excellent way. So she will talk about the project, its focus, and the breadth of responses. Dr. Healy is Professor Emerita from the University of Connecticut School of Social Work, where she taught human rights, international development, and nonprofit management for over 35 years. She is now the main representative to the UN for the International Association of Schools of Social Work. Lynn, you have the floor.
Greetings, excuse me, greetings to everyone. 4 days in this dry indoor weather has gotten to my voice, so I apologize. As has been said before, our aim as the Grassroots Subcommittee of the NGO Committee for Social Development is to bring the voices of people at the grassroots into the United Nations. I think the first step in terms of leaving no one behind is finding out who they are and where they are. And that's easy to say, but it's not an easy task. What our committee tries to do is to reach out, often through our member non-governmental organizations that are working on the ground around the world, and use them to access people on the ground who are experiencing the problems that we are trying to address. We engaged on this particular project by sending requests for video statements and written statements to our member NGOs and asking that they then reach out to their slides. Sorry, I'm not used to that. I always control my own slides. Maybe Sarah can do a better job of me knowing when it's time for the next one. We left ourselves a very tight timeline, and we have really paid the price for that in the last few weeks. We asked the respondents to identify the priority issues in their locale. And then secondly, we asked if they could actually attend and speak at the Second World Social Summit. What would they like to say to international government leaders and others who were present at the summit? Sarah? In spite of the fact that we gave people very little time to respond, we were amazed to get 81 responses, almost evenly divided between videos and written statements. One of the more impressive things is that these came from 33 different countries across 5 continents. This time we didn't get responses from the Pacific Island and Australia region, which is surprising because we usually do, but the other continents were well represented. Our respondents were arranged. They ranged from youth and older persons as well as adults. We actually got some responses from children. We won't show you any videos of children because of the complexities of consent, but some of them, some young teenagers wrote written responses that were very compelling. Respondents were arranged, they were students, they were religious workers, there was a construction worker, a farmer, social workers, someone who installs water filters in a grassroots project in Cambodia, healthcare workers, and retirees. This shows you the respondent countries, and you'll see that they are pretty well distributed. Again, not too many from North America, just I think one from the US, one from Canada, but very good distribution of responses from Asia and Africa. Part of this was aided by the fact that we translated all of our materials into Portuguese, French, and Spanish. And our experience over the last few surveys we've done is that that really yields a tremendous benefit in terms of getting responses. What are some of the more pressing problems that people responded about? Not surprisingly, poverty. Poverty and the things that go along with poverty, lack of access, lack of services, lack of water, access to healthcare, etc. Climate change, of course, is a huge issue, and we're seeing it more and more. And I noticed in the plenary sessions this week, almost everyone has mentioned climate change, and interestingly enough, has stated that environmental was one of the pillars of Copenhagen, which I don't think it was. But anyway, it's such a pressing issue now that we can't imagine a time when we didn't talk about the climate. Perhaps going along with that, environmental degradation and the problem of waste. I was very happy, Marta, to hear you talk about non-discrimination, because that was another thing that really stood out, was the responses about people experiencing discrimination, exclusion, marginalization in their grassroots localities. And relatedly, gender inequality. New slide. This just again shows you there were a lot of issues. The ones in the larger type are the ones we heard from the most, but you can see there's many other things that were mentioned, like homelessness, housing, unemployment, mental health, drugs, etc. I'm going to share before I close a few messages that came from our written responses. You'll hear some of the responses that came by video. But from rural Brazil, one of them called on the governments to create equity and humanize the world by halting planet destruction. From South Sudan, the respondent said, please reconsider the world economy according to a model in which human dignity and life is at the center. Establish a global fund to eradicate hunger and facilitate educational activities aimed at promoting sustainable development. And in recognition of their ecological debt, the more prosperous countries should feel called upon to do everything possible to forgive the debts of those that are in no condition to pay the amount they owe. I'm reading the quotes because, again, our purpose is to really share the voices. Otherwise, I wouldn't normally read my slides. Another set of messages, this one from Latvia, said support the development of strong local leadership and community organizations and implement policies that address income inequality, poverty, and discrimination. I think for us in the civil society community, it's very important to stress, as several of our respondents did, the idea of locality, local leadership, engagement, participation as major themes. And from a community, a really grassroots community level project in Cambodia, urged governments to support policies that empower local communities to take ownership of resources. By providing tools, training, and funding for community-led projects, we can ensure long-term sustainability and dignity for every individual. And finally, this one was very sort of dramatic message that we got from some Canadians who were working at a community level kitchen and tiny homes serving the homelessness. There's no longer a time for us to debate and discuss the core of the problem. The time for action is now. When those who are on the ground to witness the tragedy and violence of poverty are waving their arms in the air, begging for relief, there needs to be an immediate and urgent response. One that listens to leaders who see the impact of policy on a day-to-day basis and places the needs of suffering people first. You'll hear more messages shortly and a few more tomorrow if you attend this civil society forum. One of the videos that I think is going to be shown, whoops, my last slide, please. Can you find it, Sarah? Well, sorry about that. I think this message that I put up because one of the speakers on one of the videos said, I hope my voice is heard. And I think that's very, very important for us to think about. So we hope the voices of those who responded to us will be heard here and beyond, and at the Second World Social Summit. And Barbara will now introduce a little bit about the videos.
Very little. Okay, thank you, Lynn. It's certainly important to recognize the fact that there are many people in the grassroots across the world that are very concerned about the issues that they're facing and that their people are facing. And they do have messages and hopes that the World Social Summit and the world leaders will respond to some of these needs. And some of them have suggestions or very good practices as well. So it's quite interesting to see. So we will begin with 3 videos. The first from persons on the ground, and they are the first one is from Indonesia, the second from Niger, and the third is from Ireland. We've sewn them together so that it's one video, but 3 individuals speaking. And I think you will be touched by their voices and what they have to say.
Hello, my name is Adelita and I'm speaking for all youths and families lynching a slum in Jakarta, Indonesia. In my community, life is very hard. Rotten programs like free education or free healthcare do not respect us. Instead, it's making food and basic needs too expensive for us. When we try to apply for a job, employer asks for diploma and document we cannot afford to get. Even when we find a job, many companies do not respect the minimum wage and we are paid very little. I personally want to work in the tourism sector. The last point is the traffic. It's so bad that it takes hours to get to work. We also face a serious problem in our environment. There are a mountain of trash around our home and a lot of pollution. Flooding is getting worse, damaging our house. We are in the constant dangers and we might not have any place to call home very soon. We need access to paid training and design jobs with a fair wage and a labor laws for more equality. With a good job, we can support ourselves and our family. We also need better infrastructure in slum and the long-term solution for voting and trash management. We, Life Project for Youth, the activity supports the community. We train our neighbors to their rights so they can request a better consideration, so we teach them about the healthy and sustainability. We also provide a clean water to community to help avoid the health issue. We are working hard, we are motivated, but we cannot do it all on our own. We need the help of words of leaders and hope they will hear our voice, so we can work together to eradicate poverty and create a society of great equality and human dignity. Thank you.
Ayo Abubakar Saleno, Kango Uratondi Mosika Tilbir Zomora. Tilbir Mosika Nyamai, Niger. Igo Faukoira. Faukoimo Gobore Kanye Igo da Benitare. Ta programme kirgo di ta irnan Kanyedo. Barkango jirbi kino to imla boyon bosen ku kande mata zanka hinno do tije da zanka kunno ikawu sai bore ga zami ne benyo mai ngadu nan kan aga kani dangana kan burkina ikanci iga bore doren dinga nere no ngado habora bu boy ne bore shi ni nera zami ne benyo mai himga kaga ne burkina no ngada iga bore jin dawdu labu iga bore do tije doren di go zanka doren zanka bu boy time ko ekol di ko ekol kurkurno jama'a gi gana imi gare kandufu ne benye o sikeu ekol dulum tor kwarara ndir koida imi bor fo gono irwor sudu safar da mi ne benyo imi hinga safar burkini gono donc ya dinga ro ka de dir gore ya din ka de din boran safar da ka du fundiki ne borago hinga bu irwor bora sudu sale kulu da bu mo igine talifu sanni fokusi ya dinga har no kan irga bagin bore ma matkan goti dan mai tara ba songo agon Niger labora da yebo mono boy bore ko igi gare igi kar ashinda kulki stage ire dunya ba funa da asigbo zambor sidirgu indi ko nan kan kanse ba ni godirgu indi bor fogo di ko wona ga ari ngala kalkane sino ari ngaro kasura da nirgo ba kan sai gine boro ba kan woni kwara asi kasura to ro karari go kasura ban kan woni bisa zamiro siga ba funa kutte ba ferno ni go bor fogo ko wona ga ari ngado ne kusino din boram dugu be kan ban tare ago Niger ngise no rugo sanna woti mi yaddan da kan kuna go woni suba go Niger wara igo go more kan sigo ne banye mo igo gi dorendi irga ba mo mi ke kirse goy hanne dam kan se bore kan sigo ne banye igo gi kainen digmo ba goyino igo ba isu duanye ja indi nyamar ga bero ke gitera irga ba ima sanno dan sanno mo koy indugo be kan matkan Niger bore kan sigo ne banye matki go tabinda do gurziga da sanda ki godi ngise no irga ba re sanno am to jin bore do indugo be matkan goti kan halaka kaso aga cindi Niger ra bore kan sigine banyi gogi dorendi gogi kacha kursi ne kisigi.
My name is Brian and I live and work in Dublin, Ireland. Right now there are ongoing negotiations to form the next government of Ireland. Ireland is one of the only countries in Europe that has returned to power a largely centrist government. This is important given that Ireland is not immune to the rise of the right, but despite the rhetoric, we want and have voted for a government who will stand up to their views and genuinely welcome the stranger. Ireland has been especially generous to those who seek refuge from the war in Ukraine. But Ireland does have its problems that need immediate and concentrated attention and effort. We have a severe housing crisis with over 15,000 people now classed as homeless, and this includes 4,170 children, and these are record numbers. We have a system of housing asylum seekers that even the government admits falls far short of what is acceptable. This new government will run until 2030 and so will be charged with the responsibility of delivering on the SDGs for all, not just for those in Ireland, but abroad also. We have been actively campaigning for a doubling of our overseas development aid, and we can afford it, understanding that we have a responsibility to those furthest behind abroad as well as at home. We can and must lead by example.
So those are the first three videos that we chose to show you. And they bring different voices from very different parts of the world and very different issues. And yet we know that many of those issues are found in all our countries. I don't care if it's discrimination, if it's pollution, if it's housing, everywhere in the world, those issues are faced by the populations, and we need to be aware of that. We now have the pleasure to hear a live person from Zimbabwe, Mr. Alwande Moyo, who is a Zimbabwean youth leader and advocate who is joining us by Zoom today. He served as the Junior Minister of Environment, Tourism and Climate in the Junior Parliament of Zimbabwe and has demonstrated exceptional leadership and a passion for promoting social justice, environmental sustainability, and human rights in his country and also across the African continent. We look forward to hearing your wisdom, Alwande, so please, you now have the floor. Unmute yourself and thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. My presentation will be predicated on two critical issues which are a problem within my home nation, which is Zimbabwe. It's the Southern African nation, and it suffers from a wide range of problems such as the water crisis, the El Nino-induced drought, and littering, especially which is attacking our major cities like Bulawayo and Harare. And so to deal with these issues, I will start with the water crisis. Bulawayo is currently grappling with serious issues to do with water. Over 1 million households face daily shortages, with some going without running water for weeks on end or even months. And so this crisis has been attributed to a combination of factors, including the aging infrastructure. So we have old dams which have been decommissioned, or simply leakages or pipes which have aged and need to be repaired consistently, and the government simply does not have the means to do so. Then we also have the El Nino-induced drought. If you look at Zimbabwe's geographical location and countries in the sub-Saharan Africa, they have suffered a lot from the El Nino-induced drought, and we have also inadequate stores. So in terms of the dams that the government is constructed or provided to harvest water, we simply have less or not enough to meet the growing demand and the growing population. So it is on this very basis that I propose the following measures to avert the crisis at hand. Number one, I propose that the government of Zimbabwe, in conjunction with major financial institutions like the IMF and the Africa Development Bank, pay for the completion of dams like the Glass Block Dam. We know that the Glass Block Dam is a dam that is at 70% completion. So it means that 30% is yet to be completed, and it's simply a lack of financial resources that is at play. And so I think the government needs to partner with these major financial institutions to cater for the completion of such dams. Two, we have a big dam known as the Gwai Shangani Dam, which can cater for the whole country if completed. And so I urge the government and relevant authorities to put their heads together, put their efforts together, and put their energies together to try and cater for this crisis of water. Two, I urge the government to drill more boreholes within towns and cities within Zimbabwe. We find that in Bulawayo, there is severe shortage of water. And so to cater for this shortage of water, the government is going to simply drill more boreholes, as we know that Zimbabwe is suffering and the citizens are suffering and are bearing the brunt of the water crisis. Three, I call for local government and NGOs like World Vision, which operate in Zimbabwe, to run awareness campaigns which conscientize the public, the general public, on issues to do with water conservation and how to report leakages. Then on our second issue, in terms of the Zimbabwean crisis, we have a serious issue of environmental degradation. So when we come to environmental degradation, in particular, I'm referring to littering, which is prevalent in our large cities like Harare, our capital city, and the second largest city, which is Bulawayo. So we have a major littering crisis in Zimbabwe, and here's a comprehensive plan, which I think and believe is sustainable, cost efficient, and comprehensive to deal with the issue at hand. Number one, I urge the government to introduce stringent laws, which try to tackle the littering crisis. We find that we have laws in place like the fines, but the fines are laws that the police don't follow up on. We have municipality police which don't follow up on those fines. And I think that the government should have a proper tracking system which seriously punishes those who litter in our cities. Two, we have to have public education which is improved. We see that in Zimbabwe's current education curriculum, we don't have the inclusion of issues like littering and climate change. And we see that we need to entrench this within our school curriculum so as to educate these citizens from a young age. And we see that if we try and educate the citizens from a young age, they will grow into responsible and well-groomed citizens who can live anywhere in the world and try to follow these laws, and laws that are as simple as don't litter in town. They will follow this simply because they've grown up to such laws and they've been accustomed and they've adapted to such laws. Three, I think that the government of Zimbabwe to seriously consider introducing a recycling system. What do I mean by a recycling system? I see that in Zimbabwe, waste segregation hasn't been a good idea that government has taken up, but I think it's a good idea for government to include waste segregation in its environmental policies. So what do I mean by waste segregation? Creating separate bins for separate waste. And then in that case, we are able to recycle, and it means that people won't simply throw away plastic all over. This plastic can simply be put into bins and recycled for future use. Three, I urge the Zimbabwean government and local government in the Zimbabwean structure to completely put a ban on plastic or the use of single-use plastics in favor of alternative and sustainable measures like the bamboo straws, cloth bags, and seaweed packaging. As we see that plastic is choking our seas, it's all over the streets. It has created this huge mess that is indirectly or directly contributing to climate change and etc. Then what are we as Justice Desk, the organization that I represent, doing to push for those issues to be addressed by local government structures? Number one, as it has been mentioned too previously in this meeting, I was the Junior Minister of Environment, Tourism and Climate. And in my capacity as the Junior Minister, I made sure that I led school-to-school campaigns to conscientize students from a young age on how littering has affected our towns, on how littering has affected our seas, our oceans, and our water bodies, and how it has contaminated our water bodies, on how it has blocked our drainage systems, and on how it is contributing to climate change, especially if it leads to oceans and kills and chokes these marine lives, which are essential for marine ecosystems. Two, I've also run what I call silent protests when I meet with senior government officials. So basically, when I meet with senior government officials, I've run what I call silent protests. This is basically me gathering up a group of students within high schools of Zimbabwe to say that let us advocate for effective actions to tackle these issues within Zimbabwe and to effectively face and address these issues. And for me, it's not to run away. So we've run silent protests. 3, we've collaborated with organizations like UNICEF within Zimbabwe, which directly liaises with the Minister of Environment, the Senior Minister of Environment, to say that let us address the issues, for we are running for the fierce agency of the now. Because we see that littering and the water crisis are issues of the now, and they are not issues of the future, and they need to be addressed urgently and with the utmost respect that the Zimbabweans deserve. And with this, I think I've wrapped up my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alwande. I appreciate your insights and also the suggestions that you have. You've raised some of the issues and what needs to be dealt with, but you also have some good ideas on how one might begin to deal with them, and including how you individually and people of your age and this civil society around you can help to bring about some change. So that's really important. So thank you so much. The next item is 2 more videos. We have a video from Brazil and one from Mauritius, which we will watch now. Again, 2 very different issues, but very equally important. And you'll see some connections with the things that have been brought up.
Eu sou a irmã Nivalda e falo do Alto Sertão da Paraíba, Brasil. Uma região marcada pela seca severa e pela luta diária contra a pobreza. Aqui, a nossa terra é rica em cultura e fé, mas ao mesmo tempo castigada pela escassez de água e pelas dificuldades econômicas. As chuvas são imprevisíveis e insuficientes, deixando muitas famílias sem meios para cultivar alimentos ou criar animais. Essa realidade leva ao aumento da fome, a migração forçada e a falta de oportunidades, especialmente para os jovens. Muitas vezes não há acesso adequado à saúde, educação e trabalho digno, perpetuando um ciclo de desigualdade e sofrimento. Gostaria, senhores líderes, que discutisse na cimeira e resolvesse as questões urgentes em nossa realidade, pois precisamos de políticas públicas que valorizem as pessoas das áreas rurais, como acesso à água por meio de cisternas e tecnologias sustentáveis, incentivos à agricultura familiar e programas que promovam dignidade e igualdade social. No entanto, a nossa comunidade não se entrega. Temos exemplos de resistência como mulheres organizadas em cooperativas, jovens que investem no artesanato e projetos comunitários que buscam soluções locais para os nossos problemas. Com apoio e solidariedade, podemos fazer muito mais. Peço que olhem para o Alto Sertão e para outras regiões esquecidas, com o compromisso de transformar vidas e construir uma sociedade mais justa, onde todos tenham a oportunidade de viver com dignidade. Muito obrigada.
Water scarcity has been and remains a problem that humanity has faced throughout history.
There is enough fresh water on the planet for 7 billion people, but it is unevenly distributed and too much of it is wasted, polluted and unsustainably managed.
The lack of water in Bamboo Bayou is a problem that has persisted since the dawn of time, as evidenced by this correspondence from 2010. Climate change plays a significant role in water scarcity. Being in the southeast region of Mauritius, Bambouveille is known for its extremely low amount of rainfall precipitation during summer months. Some of the solutions proposed over time to help in the everyday running of the college are as follows. Every morning, or as far as possible, a lorry from the Central Water Authority is being paid by the college to provide us with water. Another solution is the rainwater harvesting project by the government.
As you can see, this is our rainwater harvest collector, a project launched in 2019 from the local government, mainly used for irrigation purposes, sanitary purposes, and for the cleaning up of the school compound. But as we are in the southern region of Mauritius, which is a dry region with low rainfalls, this project is not successful.
To address this challenge effectively, some best solutions are enforce stricter regulation on water use and wastage.
Introduce incentives to adopt water-saving technologies and practices.
Protect and restore forests, wetlands, and watersheds to improve groundwater recharge and reduce runoff.
Conduct reforestation campaigns to increase vegetation cover, which enhance natural water retention and reduce evaporation.
With over 2 billion people lacking access to safe water, it is crucial to act now to combat global water scarcity and ensure a sustainable future for all.
Thank you. Technology is certainly very important, but it doesn't always work perfectly. So I regret that some of it was very difficult to hear, but there, for the most part, we could understand it because of the subtitles and what was on the screen. And it's just interesting to see, water keeps coming up, and climate change, environmental pollution, and water are big issues in many, many areas. And that's a good deal of what we heard today. They're not the only issues, certainly, but they are important ones. So now that we've had all this input from our two presenters, from Portugal and DESA, and seen the videos, and we've heard about the project and heard the voices of people on the ground, we have asked Sue Wilson to kind of draw the threads together before we go into questions and comments. Sue is the Executive Director of the Office for Systemic Justice for the Federation of the Sisters of St. Joseph in Canada. And so she's had little time to reflect on the videos previously. I did send them to her, and then to listen to what is happening here. And I'm sure that her words will be very valuable. Sue?
No pressure. Well, I'm aware that I'm still very much trying to integrate what I've heard. So first thoughts here, but I am aware of the questions that are arising within me, as well as tensions that have been arising within me as I listen to the input, and aware of the need to hold on to some contrasting views and perspectives rather than just kind of trying to do away with the tensions. I think the challenge that I'm feeling is to hold on to those tensions in a way that's not paralyzing, but that actually clarifies some steps and actions to be taken. So one of the tensions, did you notice how the responses from the different groups integrated social, economic, and environmental concerns? Clearly, those issues are integrated in people's lives. And then secondly, even as I learned about the project and the strong focus on poverty from many of the responses, I was drawn to that written response from Brazil, which called for a new economic model. It raised the question for me, is the problem too much poverty? Or is it the unrestrained pursuit of wealth? And I'll return to that shortly. A third tension, The SDGs have been critical in kind of illuminating that path forward to a better future. Yet, I noticed in the videos that grassroots groups that are doing so much of the work on the ground to bring SDGs forward, they keep being hit by the barriers from the old system. Whether we're talking about government austerity, corporations that don't respect social and economic rights, as Adelitha spoke to, old prejudices, as Bubakar spoke to, a lack of social protections in so many places, and the lack of decent work. What if we go a little bit deeper into those tensions? I felt like the community groups were being endlessly creative with the issues that were in front of them. Think of Elwande's list of all the things that he wanted done and that he was working on, or Navalda. Collectively, they're finding ways to address social, economic, and environmental issues. But too many national governments, unlike Portugal, too many national governments can't open their thinking beyond the tight parameters of the neoliberal economic model. And that leads to another tension, because the SDGs require a different economic model, something like the well-being economy that we've heard so much about this week. Thing is, though, this new economic model won't fully emerge until we're also doing the work of dismantling the old neoliberal economic model. Because the neoliberal model still dominates our collective consciousness. It is not designed to lead to greater economic equality or greater social inclusion. It's not designed to lead to the care of the planet. It's designed to ensure that there's lots of wealth and that it flows upwards to the wealthiest in our society. Another tension. You want me to stop shortly?
No,
I got a list of tensions. Of course, the SDGs need financial backing, but in the neoliberal model, the focus on financial assets not only towers over the real economy of jobs, it also dominates over our politics, our society, and even the Earth's ecosystems. Water and forests are now seen as a new type of financial asset. So the tension calls for strict parameters on private financing. In the neoliberal model, water is not understood as a common good to be shared, as a video from Mauritius was advocating for. Rather, water becomes a source of financial wealth, even as water shortages harm communities. Likewise, water services are privatized, costing people more money, while water sources are commodified by big corporations for profit. And it's all very easily done because the neoliberal model thrives on the weakening of regulations, including environmental regulations. Of course, there are some regulations that are unhelpful and need to be removed. At the same time, without some strong, effective regulations, the economy will never serve the well-being of the people and the planet. I'm aware of the time, so I'm going to stop there, but I invite you just to consider some of the tensions that you've been feeling as you listen to the videos. As we've heard from you and Dessa, we know the answers. The policies are easily outlined. It's getting us to that new vision, to the new norms, the new values. And that's a lot of the work of civil society.
Thank you, Sue. You certainly have given us a lot of food for thought. I do believe you hit on some very important issues, and the financing piece is certainly essential, and how that's done and the model of financing that we have and the fact that we need to rethink this is all certainly very valid. And we need to continue to work on that with the help of all the people that we can. So we would like to now we have about 10 minutes left, to open the floor for questions or comments. So maybe we can take two, okay, from the floor first. Okay, I have two people here. Despina will go with the microphone and then, okay, and then there's one over there.
Thank you very much for hosting this forum. It's very informative, and thanks to our speakers. And I can feel the energy in this room. There's a lot of desire for participation, for dialogue. So I want to ask a quick question to our Mr. Aranda, and one quick question to Martha. So you talked about engagement, and so you invited partnership, you talked about social dialogue. So my question for you is, what are the effective ways you have found that are helpful and is effective? That's actually working when you have dialogues with government is one thing, but this is an NGO. But if you can share some Portugal examples, that would be fantastic. That's the effective way. And then Ms. Martha, you talking about social policies. So I forgot to introduce myself. Lizo from the International Director at the Center for Social Development at Washington University in St. Louis. And thanks, Professor Healy, we are invited as a member of the International Association of School of Social Work to be here, to have the opportunity to engage and hear and learn from everyone. So we do social policies at our research center. We would love to engage with your organization, but we don't know how. So if you can give us some guidance and wisdom, and see how we can, as a eager and ready to engage NGO member, how can we do that? Thank you very much.
So thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to express my desire. So listening all of you as well as these videos, actually, I didn't feel nothing new because I am coming from India, from Medical Mission Sisters. For us, we experience all these things in our heart. Drought, scarcity of water, poverty, discrimination, caste discrimination, gender inequality, even all these things we experience in our life. So as I was listening it, I felt that most of us and most of the VIPs, all these people, they have their own social securities, they have their own social protections, those who are in high level or something. But the poor people, those who are especially in agriculture level, those who are doing some agriculture work, and as well as the people, those who are doing their making food for us, the level of grassroots involvement, they have actually, there is no pension, no social security, no social protection. So my question is that, what is the role of the NGOs, especially for the farmers? So those who are who is the bone of and who are the bone of our livelihood, who produce the food for us. So this is my question. So it's because all these things, climate change, all these things, it is actually affect the farmers.
Thank you.
So thank you.
My name is Manohar Pawar. I am Professor of Social Work from Charles Sturt University, Australia, and the President of the International Consortium for Social Development. I would like to thank all the panelists who presented, made excellent points, as well as those who presented online. I also would like to thank Professor Lynn Healy, who nominated us to come here through the IASSW. I have two specific questions. I appreciate the point that the civil society and partner social organizations need to engage well with the government, which is a very valid point. But recently, some governments are consciously cutting the funds for the NGOs, trying to reduce their role, and also defining what they should do and what they shouldn't do. And those NGOs, who are engaging in advocacy role, certainly the governments are cutting their funds and trying to make them mute. So how can we enhance this NGO social partners participation against this tension which Sue Wilson mentioned, that this government is adopting some governments are adopting this policy of closing NGOs or reducing their voice. These are contradictory developments in the current change, and how to deal with that. Number one question. Number two, when you talk about social development, here we are talking about universal solutions in terms of universal protection, universal health, and things like that. How can we move from the nation building in terms of one nation competing against another nation to building one world? It is not about whether we have these things in one nation. It is about everybody, every citizen in the world have access to these things. So how can we move from nation building, from one nation competing against another, to one world building? Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to ask Mr. Alwanda or Ms. Roy, would you like to comment on what you've heard so far or respond to any of the questions?
Well, thank you very much for all these questions and comments. And if there were not enough tensions on the list of Sue Wilson, I identify here a lot of them. And one of them, starting maybe from the end, one of the tensions I see here is the tension between competition and cooperation. I majored in international relations, and the thesis of my still ongoing PhD is on science diplomacy and how science can bring about change, not just in the relationship between countries, but also in the world at large. And one of the concepts that I try to deepen in my studies is the concept of co-opetition. So the tension between competition and cooperation. I believe that although there is a tension, it's not an insurmountable one. I believe that in our state of affairs, having almost 200 countries in the world and all of them competing for resources of all kinds, I believe that the reality of competition is one that we acknowledge. And this is not just as states. We experience competition as individuals as well. It's also part of our own development as a humankind competition. So I don't believe that we will ever get rid of it, because it's also maybe something positive. But it can be framed by the sense of cooperation that we all feel here, and that sometimes we give other names, such as solidarity. And cooperation is what we do here best at the United Nations, where precisely that almost 200 countries come together, competing as they are, but because they are acknowledging that they have to sit at the same table and engage proactively and cooperatively, because the challenges they face are no longer challenges that they can face alone. And responding here to our co-participant from India, one of the challenges is food security. We talk a lot about security, and in Portugal we have a wide understanding of security, which does not resume to peace and security as we know it, the so-called hard security. But all these forms of human security, including food security, is very important. So I would say that we have to frame the natural reality of competition with this sense of cooperation that comes from this acknowledgement that we are facing common risks and common challenges. Another tension that I feel here, to come back to the tensions, is one between ambition and pragmatism. And to answer here to our first question that was put forward here by our professor, we, and also trying also to give here a concrete example from Portugal as requested, how when looking back at what was our experience with the Porto Social Summit, what we did was not just get all these people around the table, governments, civil social partners, but was actually trying to get them committing to something. Now, we are always asking the government to do something, right? And we should, because we are paying also our taxes in order to get out of it. But we know that some of those commitments we can have those achieved also in working in that social dialogue. So we ended the social summit in Porto with the so-called European social, the Porto social commitments, and this framed our ambition, and the ambition is there also here. It was already mentioned that we already have the framework, we already have the SDGs, we already have the 10 commitments of Copenhagen. We already have a lot to guide us, right? Also the Pact for the Future, for instance, and all those actions. But this is the ambition, and then we need the pragmatism. And the pragmatism comes from what we are able to commit to. And that commitment, that Porto Social commitment, led to an action plan. And this is where this pragmatism comes in. We need to understand how we are going to do it, who is going to do it, with what means, until when, and develop also very feasible and very concrete, measurable indicators and targets to do so. So I think that from my experience, something that in that sense, like framing this ambition with some pragmatism is also needed. The last question was also from our professor here on another type of tension, which is the tension within the countries, between governments and the social sector and NGOs. We know here Portugal is very keen on having in all processes of the United Nations, as much as possible, NGOs and the civil society coming into what we call the policy shaping, or decision shaping. We are aware that decision-making is up to the states. The United Nations is an intergovernmental organization. Nobody is asking us to change it. But we can have decision shaping influenced by the voice of the civil society. And we are keen on having that. Some countries are not, maybe because of their not so open societies, are not so keen in doing so. But here as well, I believe that the working, peer-to-peer and within a framework that can highlight the benefits of cooperation, maybe can also influence those countries to open up their societies and allow an enabling environment for NGOs to thrive. And this can be done in accordance with something that we didn't speak so much about here today, which is human rights. The link between human rights and development is a very important one. And social development, as we understand it here, is like hand in glove with human rights. And there as well, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We just have to come back to the founding instruments of the United Nations and see what path they can offer us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very valuable insights and contribution to this discussion. And now I really need to go back and look at what the Porto Social Contract was, because commitments, because I think that's very valuable. Thank you. Ms. Roy, would you like to
just add quickly, because I know we are at the end of the session. We are at the end of the session, and Jorge has already set the parameters very well. But just maybe to answer the last question, to add on with more pessimistic, I'm going to add one tension to this, which is I completely agree that competition is maybe, I don't know if it's necessary or not, but it's part of human nature. What happens is that the way in which, and I have to go back to the neoliberal ethos of the last 30 years, the way in which competition has been managed has not been good. Global competition, when globalization started, global competition led to leaving some countries behind and some groups of people behind, right? It happened very fast. It didn't happen with listening to everyone's and every country, not in everyone's interest, so it left some people behind. The result of this having left some people and some countries behind is that some countries and some people have closed back. We are going back into a very, I would say, protectionist, if we talk in economic terms, of nationalistic type of ideology that is not conducive to cooperation, right? At a time when cooperation is most needed, because as Jorge said, more and more problems are now global. So we need the stage that the UN and other multilateral institutions provide. However, many countries are closing back. So we are in a vicious cycle. How do we break this cycle? I go back to that we need a new, you called it a new model, we can call it a new consensus, but we need something new to come in instead of that neoliberal ethos, which has been criticized, but it didn't really die, right? There's a lot of criticism, but it hasn't really died. So we need to break that, and it's not only member state governments who can do that. It has to be civil society, and it has to do a lot with the institutional and normative change that I was talking about in the beginning, I think. It is very high level, but I think we all have to contribute to this normative change, right? On how NGOs can contribute, there are informal ways to participate, and I think shaping policy, participating in informal discussions that we have, in expert group meetings that we have is a way, and we can talk about how to do it. There's a more formal way to be part of the UN, and the NGO committee can explain how to formally become part of the NGO UN family, but there are informal ways to affect the process as well.
Thank you very much. We regret that we're beyond time, actually. We don't have enough time to answer all the questions, and there are some online. We regret that. Maybe if you want to send them, if we can respond, I don't know. But I thank you, Mr. Landa, Ms. Roy, certainly Lynn, Sue, and Alwande for your very valuable insights. I think we have much food for thought, and we also thank all those who have attended either in person or online. And we hope that this side event has certainly opened your eyes to some of the issues around us and maybe possible responses as well, because that certainly is important, and how each of us can be engaged, because all of us need to be engaged. And we actually do hope that some of these voices will help to shape the discussions both preceding and during the Second World Social Summit. So thank you very much, all of you, for participating and for giving our presenters for your very valuable insights. Just give us a moment.
Summary. Thank you very much.